The Lord of the Rings trilogy was something that I'm still fond of in terms of just the time that it was and the way that the crew came together. It was like my second university degree. It was the one that I should have done first, but it came at the right time.
One ring to rule them all. One ring to find them. One ring to bring them all. And in the darkness, bind them. Next Christmas, the most extraordinary tale ever told will come to life.
Hello, my name is Martin Kwok. I'm based in Wellington, New Zealand, a lot of the time at Park Road Post-Productions. I've been involved with a lot of the films in Wellington since my start in film, which was in Lord of the Rings back in 2001, and I've been a part of all of Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh's projects since then, and amongst many other things that have come through Wellington over the years. In terms of education, I actually studied at university and did something completely unrelated to film. I studied a commerce degree, marketing and management and so forth, but when I finished that I realized I didn't want to put on a shirt and tie and go and sell Coca-Cola. So I had very supportive parents that were, happy to tell me to, follow my dreams. I've always had a passion for music, done a lot of radio and DJ work, and that led me into sound engineering. So I studied sound engineering after I got my university degree, and that led me almost by chance into post-production work, which was a bit of a blessing in disguise because it's meant that music has remained a great passion for me, but I haven't had to earn a living through it. And I've always really, been enamored by film and television, so I found my home almost accidentally, but quite happily. My role within the post-production side of filmmaking is as a sound editor. And my main skill base within that is within dialogue, as a dialogue editor, dialogue supervisor, and nowadays a supervising sound editor as well. The process of post-production sound is, and certainly from a dialogue point of view, if I sort of like try and make it a bit more specific, is effectively taking everything that comes off set, all the location sound, and looking after that all the way through to the final mix. It's very much a process of, it's like tilling a garden really, and looking after all that material, and of course as the picture cut changes, so does all that media. And on top of that we also have an ADR process where we bring the actors back into a controlled studio environment to re-record lines that don't quite work, and also crowd and loop group stuff as well. So that makes up the dialogue side of a soundtrack, and it fits in with the rest of what the sound editorial team does collectively, including the effects editors, sound designers, Foley editors, and also, we pretty much at the final mix we all meet up with the music team. It's one of those things where it's not, we don't concurrently run with the music department, but at the final mix it all comes together. One of the good things about being a dialogue editor and dialogue supervisor is you do get to build relationships with the filmmakers, the directors and the producers, because there is a lot of back and forth in terms of the storytelling. I really see my role as a dialogue editor as making sure that the filmmaker's vision is met. We do that collectively, and any sound editor is involved in making sure that the story is told first and foremost. But from a dialogue point of view, the narrative is important. There's a dialogue is king sort of situation where if you don't get the story across, then you're not serving the story. So you do end up making relationships with the directors in order to make sure that you can you can tell their story. In terms of the mix environment that we work within, of course, cinema mixes are becoming more and more immersive with regard to what once was, 5.1 sound, and then 7.1, and then having full range surrounds and now Dolby Atmos. It's becoming, there's more ways of being able to bring sound off the screen and actually into life in terms of the story and the way that you bring the images to life. So in terms of the editorial process for that, specifically within dialogue, we are generally always populating the center channel. That is where the narrative needs to be first and foremost. It's also one of those rules that are quite hard to break in terms of bringing dialogue, panning it off screen to where it physically might be, should be in reality, but to be able to just put stuff suddenly into the back speakers can be very off-putting. So a lot of the time, from a dialogue point of view, we keep it quite straight in terms of using the screen channels, so mainly the center channel and a little bit of divergence. There are some pioneering examples, I think, using Dolby Atmos, where I was majorly impressed by the mix that went into Roma, where there was a lot of panned dialogue. It's not everyone's cup of tea. It's something that I would be very hesitant to do, but the way that that came together for that film showed me that there's, when done right, it can be really immersive. I'm not sure how many people got to hear it in Atmos, and it was one of those things that I'm so pleased I did, because it showed me some of the strengths that you can do when you break the rules. But mainly within the using the surrounds and particularly Dolby Atmos, it's more geared towards the ambiences and various effects objects. And certainly the projects that I've been involved with since Dolby Atmos came around have certainly, we've used the format as soon as it was launched. We were very fortunate that when we were making The Hobbit, that Dolby got in touch with Peter Jackson and said, "Would you like to play with Dolby Atmos?" And he said yes. So they installed an Atmos room in one of the mixed theatres at Park Road, and now both of the main stages at Park Road are, full Dolby Atmos cinemas. And since The Hobbit, most of the big films that we've done have utilised Atmos. And what's changed over that time is the way we do track lay for it. It used to be a little bit more, I don't want to say gimmicky, because I don't feel we knew how to use it properly when it first arrived. In that, what we did is we mixed in the normal way we did, and then we did a Dolby Atmos pass. But of course, you start to get smart about the way that the technology can serve the story and the soundtrack. So nowadays it's all about building Atmos beds and effectively working natively within Atmos from an editorial point of view all the way through the pre-dub and the final mix. So as the technology changes, we always try and change with it and adapt to and utilize it so that we can find the strengths within it to help tell the story. In terms of the various steps that we go through from sound editorial, there is an extensive period where we are working in our edit rooms and working with, as the cut develops, we bring our tracks together. And of course it comes to a point where we reach the mix, the final mix, or pre-dubs and then the final mix. We're in an interesting point in time now where there's a lot of work being done in the box, staying in Pro Tools and then going through to the final mix in that regard, which can increase efficiencies and also maintain a lot of the workflow from one end all the way to the other. I have been fortunate to generally always be a part of the final mix, which informs me to not only see the film through, but also informs you to be a better editor in terms of the choices that you make and the track layout that you present to a mixer to be able to navigate not only the track, the sounds, but also the way that it comes together in situation. And it's always a delicate dance where the dialogue has to play, otherwise you don't have a story. You really need that music to support, you know, the emotional weight of the film. The effects do an amazing job of bringing various sequences into a hyper-real, you know, situation sometimes, or just pure life, and the ambiences as well. It's just one of those things where when you do get to the take part in the final mix, it gives you more of a perspective about what's important and what gets in the way. And seeing great mixers take tracks and work them into space, you know, is a beautiful thing. You know, it's a collaboration, absolutely, and to a degree, I've always sort of looked at it like when we turn up at the final mix, there is a point where the mixer is driving, and you know they're like a rally car driver, and we're the guys with the map saying turn left, turn right. We know the road, and we can help the mixer get through the track, if you will.
Nothing ever happens in West Memphis, Arkansas.
We've had 3 children missing since last night.
3 young boys murdered in cold blood.
It appeared that they had been sexually mutilated.
Is it your opinion that these crimes were motivated by occult beliefs?
Yes.
In terms of the films that have really left a mark and you know been difficult but rewarding, I would probably say that some of the documentaries that I've had the pleasure of working on have been difficult. The first one, and I love documentaries. I'd love to do more documentaries, really. But the first one was one called West of Memphis that Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh helped produce for a lady called Amy Berg.
Arrested at 2:44 p.m., charged with 3 counts of capital murder.
Life imprisonment without parole. Death by lethal injection.
It was a very amazing process to see that through. The way that the cut changed relatively late, and then it needed to be at Sundance when we were really still just track-laying and getting it mixed. There was a very intense 10-day period where the film changed dramatically, but what came out of it was remarkable. And at the time it was very difficult because the hours are long, as they always are on most features. You know, you put a lot into the track, and your passion is, you know, has to be present. Otherwise, I think you need to sort of walk away from the game. But there was something about that show that was really difficult but extra rewarding. And in a similar light, and I don't know if it's documentaries that are the common thread, but some of the aspects of They Shall Not Grow Old, the latest film that Peter Jackson has released, which is a World War I documentary where you effectively get given the perspective of just the average British soldier in the trenches, and that was a difficult project too, in that there was a lot going on at that point in time. We also had Mortal Engines in the building at the same time, and it was an incredible film, but there was a bit of a juggle to it. And the other side of what made that difficult was the content, the getting deep inside what made up the day-to-day reality for these servicemen was emotionally harrowing, really. You know, the images were very confronting, the stories were amazing, but it just made me realize how lucky we are that we have not seen one of these conflicts in our time. I'm not, of course, like, conflict is a constant, sadly, on our planet, but in terms of, you know, the great wars, if you will, where millions of men lost their lives, it was just a frightening experience, even in a post-production capacity, to understand more about what they had to endure in those days. With regard to the projects that have really left a mark on me and I'm particularly fond of, yeah, the documentaries I mentioned, I'm very proud of the work that I've been involved with there and the way they came together. And I have to say also that the Lord of the Rings trilogy was something that I'm still fond of in terms of just the time that it was and the way that the crew came together. It was my start in film. I was so green, and I was able to just be molded by my supervisors and the crew that I was running with. And I remember within the first week of being at work feeling like I'd found home. The fact that we were talking about plotting a course over the next 9 or 10 months, we would go through various peaks and troughs and temp mixes, and the cut would change, and there was pickups, and I just thought I didn't know what I was in for at that point in time, but I loved the fact that this map was being laid out, and it made me feel very much like I'd found my people, and having the opportunity to then do that back to back in the same in the same world, if you will, Tolkien's world. It was like my second university degree. It was the one that I should have done first, but it came at the right time. And of course, back then we didn't know what those films were going to do. Like there was no, in a way that I'm sure there was a lot of pressure on Peter and Fran and Barry Osborne, the producer at the time, to get those films, really together. But I don't think, at least I certainly didn't think it was going to be as big as it was. So I think there was an amazing willingness to extend, your efforts and energies, and innovation was part of what came out of that time for the New Zealand film industry, from production and post-production. And there was a great sense of belief in the project and Peter as a filmmaker and the work that we were doing, and that has left a massive mark on me. It's inspired me from the get-go. And the other thing is I think I've always been really interested in crew, teamwork. The synergy that is created through teamwork is sometimes perhaps the most important thing to me, because it's how we get through these jobs. It's how you carry each other, it's how you learn from each other, it's what you give. And those are the things that matter more to me than the box office number or the credit that's at the end of the credit roll, Most things I've been a part of, I have seen, in the cinema. It's always great to, the problem with that is you know the film inside out. There's a part of it which is you're always waiting for the next flaw that you will never be able to change. It's long gone, it's print mastered, we just have to live with it now. So seeing it back in that sort of environment can be rewarding because it's done and you never have to go back there, but it's also distressing because we always feel that there's things that got left behind. Everyone still has notes about the things that they'd love to change. I think if you walk away from a project thinking it's absolutely perfect, then again, maybe get out of the game, because we always want to be able to make things better. And I'm not saying that the films that I've been a part of don't stand up, but we're so intimately involved in the tracks that it's easier to see where it doesn't work than where it does work. So getting out of the mixed theatre, obviously we're constantly reviewing the track during the mix. At Park Road Post, we're quite lucky to have a screening theatre downstairs where we can take the mix and literally over the server push it downstairs and go into an environment where we can listen back and sort of see how it translates. So we're doing that a lot of the time before we even finish a final mix, so that we know how it's going to feel in your average cinema. Well, no, not your average cinema, because the room is beautifully aligned and most average cinemas are not. But it's that thing of taking the work that you implicitly know exactly how it should feel, where things are playing and at what level, and then just making sure that it's actually going to work in a cinema environment. So we're constantly doing those reviews where we can, but it's a different thing altogether when you actually get the opportunity to watch it with an audience, and that's something I do value, because at the best of times it allows me to sink into the film and forget about the flaws, but it's that fresh audience reaction which can give you so much more of a visceral connection to what we've actually taken part in, which is not just a technical process of piecing a film together, but that story that is central to the piece of cinema, and seeing how that translates for audiences. So whether it's the humor or the fear and the tension, and just feeling that with people that don't know what's coming is important, because it just puts you back into being a fan of film yourself. And yeah, I do enjoy that process. Yeah. It's interesting to talk about the level that you hear soundtracks back in commercial cinemas. I guess I've always thought that I'll never hear the soundtrack play as well as we have it working in the mix room, the mix theatre, and then also downstairs. Having that opportunity, you can sort of still get a feeling of how it should sound. One of the problems that we do face when it gets out into the world is a lot of those rooms are not lined up properly. There's speakers some of the speakers are blown, and the other thing being just the level that it's playing at. We mix at 7, which can be very grueling, especially when the mix is a little out of control, where all the elements haven't really been tamed and massaged to play well. There's fatigue, ear fatigue is a real thing, and that can help you can lose perspective on where the mix is at, because you're just at it day after day. Sometimes you need to get out of that room and rest your ears and come back and sort of see, oh God, where are we? Are we making it better, or are we making it worse? But the other flip side of that is, once it's out there into the world, as sound people, a lot of the time we're just sitting there hoping that the projectionist could turn it up, because if we mix at 7, the chances are you're going to hear it back in your average multiplex or whatever at 4 or 4.5, and there's certain parts of the track that just should feel bigger and because of that better. So yeah, sometimes it's a little disappointing to sort of not have the same impact that we've been used to hearing on the final mix stage.